You're told that freedom means having unlimited options and choices available at all times. What if I told you infinite options actually imprison you in perpetual indecision? This sounds wrong because we believe more choices equal more freedom and better outcomes. But there's something that doesn't quite add up. Why do people with the most options seem unable to commit to anything? The optionality trap works by keeping every door open while preventing you from walking through any. You preserve maximum flexibility by refusing to choose. Think about the last major decision you delayed. Were you waiting for better information or avoiding the commitment itself? The system creates two completely different relationships with decision-making depending on your option availability. For people with limited choices, decisions are straightforward because alternatives don't exist. They pick the best available option and move forward. For people with unlimited choices, every decision becomes an optimization problem. They must evaluate infinite possibilities before committing to anything. This explains something curious about how different people approach life decisions. Subscribe to Prof. Jiang, explained if you want to see how choice architecture affects actual outcomes. Share this with someone who keeps all their options open but never actually does anything. People with constraints make decisions and accumulate experience. People with options postpone decisions and accumulate anxiety. Same timeline, completely different progress. Consider how each group handles career decisions. The person with limited options takes the available job and learns through doing. They might not love it, but they're gaining skills and building trajectory. The person with unlimited options keeps evaluating opportunities. Every job seems wrong because a better one might exist. They remain unemployed while seeking the perfect position that never arrives. The evaluation paralysis creates what economists might call the opportunity cost illusion. People with options believe that choosing one path means losing all other paths. This makes every choice feel like a loss. People with constraints don't experience this because they never had the alternatives to lose. One group sees choice as sacrifice. The other group sees choice as simply moving forward. But here's where the strategy becomes more sophisticated. Having options doesn't just delay decisions. It actually changes your relationship with commitment itself. When you can always switch, you never fully invest in anything. You're always halfway out the door evaluating alternatives. This prevents you from getting the deep benefits that come from total commitment. Do you keep backup plans for your backup plans? The contingency stacking reveals the trap. People with options never burn bridges or close doors. They maintain elaborate systems of alternative paths. This feels smart, but it prevents the kind of commitment that produces extraordinary results. You can't become exceptional at anything while keeping one foot in every possible direction. The system also exploits what psychologists call the maximizer versus satisficer distinction. People with limited options become satisficers who pick good enough and move on. People with unlimited options become maximizers who endlessly search for optimal. The maximizer seems smarter, but the satisficer achieves more, because they're actually doing things while the maximizer is still evaluating. Consider how different types handle relationships. The person with limited dating options meets someone decent and commits to building something. The relationship deepens through shared investment over time. The person with unlimited dating options constantly evaluates whether someone better exists. They never fully invest because they're always comparison shopping. One person builds depth, the other person accumulates first dates. The comparison mentality creates permanent dissatisfaction because better options always theoretically exist. You can imagine someone more attractive, more successful, more compatible. The current choice always falls short of the imagined ideal. People with constraints don't torture themselves with comparisons to unavailable alternatives. They work with what they have and often report higher satisfaction. But there's something even more insidious about how optionality prevents growth. Growth requires struggling through difficulty and developing capabilities. When you have options, you can escape difficulty by switching paths. This feels efficient, but prevents developing the resilience that comes from persisting through challenges. You optimize for comfort rather than development. The escape availability means people with options never develop deep expertise. When something gets hard, they pivot to something easier. They accumulate breadth without depth. People with constraints must persist because switching isn't available. They develop mastery through necessity. One group knows a little about everything. The other group knows everything about something. Have you ever noticed that constraints breed creativity while options breed mediocrity? The creative limitation reveals a paradox. Artists with limited materials create innovative work. Writers with word limits craft precise prose. Entrepreneurs with budget constraints build efficient systems. Unlimited resources often produce uninspired work because constraints force creative problem solving that abundance doesn't require. The system maintains itself through what we might call the future optionality myth. People keep options open for future flexibility, but the future is built from present actions. By refusing to commit now, you ensure you have nothing meaningful later. The preserved optionality becomes worthless because you never use time to build anything valuable. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect involves how having options creates identity diffusion. When you can be anything, you become nothing in particular. Your identity remains fluid because you refuse to declare who you are through committed choices. People with constraints develop coherent identities through their limited paths. They know who they are because their choices were forced and concrete. There's also a temporal dimension where optionality destroys presence. People with options are never fully in the current situation. They're mentally evaluating alternatives and planning exit strategies. This prevents them from experiencing anything deeply. People with constraints must be present because escape isn't available. They extract more value from current circumstances through necessity. Consider how different types experience a job they don't love. The person with options is miserable because they know alternatives exist. Every bad day confirms they should leave, but they never leave because maybe it gets better or maybe other jobs are worse. They're trapped by their own optionality. The person without options accepts the situation and finds ways to make it bearable. They often report higher satisfaction despite objectively worse circumstances because satisfaction comes from acceptance rather than comparison. The acceptance gap explains why people with fewer choices often report higher life satisfaction. They've accepted their constraints and optimized within them. People with infinite choices never accept anything because better theoretically exists. The grass is always greener through the infinite doors you haven't opened yet. But there's another layer that makes optionality particularly destructive. Options decay over time. The career you could have pursued closes as you age. The relationship you could have built becomes unavailable. The skills you could have developed require time you've now spent evaluating rather than practicing. People with constraints build trajectories through committed action. People with options wake up at 40, having preserved flexibility but built nothing. The accumulation asymmetry means constraints compound toward expertise while options compound toward anxiety. Each choice made under constraint builds on previous choices, creating momentum. Each choice delayed under optionality creates more options to evaluate, creating paralysis. One path leads somewhere specific. The other path leads everywhere theoretically and nowhere practically. This creates what decision theorists call the reversibility premium. People with options value the ability to undo choices more than the value of the choices themselves. They pick careers they can easily exit. They enter relationships they can easily leave. They buy possessions they can easily resell. This optimization for reversibility prevents them from ever being fully in anything. The constraint-bound person makes irreversible choices and therefore invests completely. The investment asymmetry explains why arranged marriages often report higher satisfaction than chosen marriages. The arranged couple has no optionality. They must make it work. They invest in solving problems because exit isn't available. The choosing couple always has the option to find someone better. This prevents total investment. Every conflict raises the question of whether they chose wrong. The constraint produces commitment. The option produces evaluation. There's also a social dimension where having options destroys community bonds. Communities require commitment from members. When everyone can leave easily, nobody invests in solving collective problems. People with geographic constraints build deep local relationships because they can't easily relocate. People with unlimited mobility keep relationships shallow because investing deeply in one place means foregoing other locations. The option to leave prevents the depth that makes staying valuable. Can you think of anyone who became extraordinary by keeping all their options open? The achievement pattern reveals the strategy's failure. Every exceptional person committed fully to specific paths early. They closed doors and burned bridges. They chose constraint over optionality and became great through total investment. Meanwhile, people who preserved maximum flexibility remained mediocre in everything because they mastered nothing. The learning asymmetry also favors constraints over options. People learn through feedback loops. Do something, get results, adjust approach. Options interrupt this cycle. You try something, it gets difficult, you switch before receiving meaningful feedback. The constraint-bound person must complete the feedback loop because switching isn't available. They learn faster despite having fewer apparent opportunities because they actually complete learning cycles. This explains why immigrants often outperform natives despite facing more constraints. The immigrant burned bridges by moving. They must succeed in the new location. This constraint forces persistence through difficulty. The native always has the option to move elsewhere if things get hard. This option prevents developing the resilience that constraints necessitate. One group builds capacity through necessity. The other group preserves optionality through avoidance. Do you have an escape plan for every commitment you've made? The Exit Strategy Collection reveals the trap. Every job has a backup plan. Every relationship has contingencies. Every location has alternatives mapped. This feels responsible, but it prevents you from being fully anywhere. The mental energy spent maintaining exit options could be spent excelling in current commitments. The system perpetuates itself because people with options who finally commit get celebrated as proof that eventually choosing works. Those who never commit get blamed for indecisiveness rather than recognizing structural impossibility. Meanwhile, people who succeed under constraints get dismissed as having had no choice when they actually benefited from that exact limitation. And perhaps most remarkably, the system has convinced people that optionality equals freedom, when actually commitment is what sets you free. When understanding that choosing one path and closing others isn't limitation, but rather liberation from the endless evaluation that keeps you permanently stuck between infinite doors you never walk through.